Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. We are here today to talk about the CBGM and in particular the Big Ten preview, and we're going to have a little look at the teams in the Big Ten. I'm going to give my thoughts in terms of what I think the strengths of the teams are, maybe the weaknesses, and then maybe a bit of a mini prediction on where I feel they might end up when the season ends. So without further ado, let's dive straight in and begin this and talk about the Big Ten. So we'll start at the top and work our way down. So at the top of the key, we obviously have Northwestern Wildcats, a team that is run by Jay Long from in the league. In terms of the roster construction, I think this is going to be a tough year for Northwestern. I think they are probably the weakest team in the conference, but there are some bright spots that we'll talk about quickly. So in terms of the team itself, it's a team that's not going to have much transition immediately through probably this season and next season. Probably season after that, Jay will be able to get to grips with some of his recruitment, and we'll start to see how his team obviously shapes up. But there are a lot of gaps on this team. In particular, at point guard, there's not a particular standout point guard. I'm not convinced that any of them are going to really stand up to some of the top teams in the Big Ten in that position. But there is a bright spot, and that is Orion Mitchell, who looks like a phenomenal outside shooter, really good defender. He's good at stealing the ball, and I'm excited to see how Jay builds his offense probably around this guy for this season and next season. You can see here he's set up pretty nicely to play motion, shuffle and triangle, so we might see some of that come to play. Whether the Northwestern decide to play a different setup, I don't know. But, for me, Mitchell's going to be a key for it. The other thing is going to be how quickly Lamar Robish develops. He looks like a really good all-round player at this moment in time, and he can play a multitude of different types of offensive proficiencies. But, we'll see how that works. He's currently a 3-star potential player. Well, he could develop into 4.5-star. So hopefully he'll develop for Northwestern. Some of these other front court guys, in particular, likes of the walk-on, might develop possibly, but can't rely on that. Probably someone like Carl Sanchez needs to bring some of that defensive ability in terms of improving his ratings there for them to be a threat in this conference. I think it's going to be a very tough year for Northwestern. Jay, you've taken on a real tough job here, if I'm being honest, especially with brutal recruiting. It's going to be about making sure that the next class and the class after that, and probably even the class after that, is of good quality to turn this one around. You've got definitely got your work cut out of Northwestern, I have to say. So we'll move on to Illinois, run by Terry Green. My notes down for these guys are just I'm really excited to see how a couple of guys play in this team. They've got a bit of an interesting shooting guard situation. They've obviously got a lot of depth in the backcourt and in sort of the wing positions. I question about the front court and how quickly that's going to develop, and that for me that'll really determine how this team plays this year. You can see they've already redshirted 2 guys here. It's not surprising. 2 guys with some very interesting potential and use here, in likes of Jay Harper, and in particular Brett Causey is going to be interesting to see how he develops, because he has that potential. You can see there to be a 5-star player, so that's going to be an interesting one. For me, the backcourt that's going to be fun because you've got Brendan Page and you've got Jay Harper. For me, personally, I think Brendan Page may end up playing at small forward. He's not got the handling ability to play in that backcourt. I feel that's where he'll be pushed down. And it probably means that someone like Anthony Blakemore will be pushed into sort of the power forward positions. And then you're probably looking at maybe Boehm maybe coming off the bench for this team. I'm excited to see how the front court works. I've got a question here. I'm really interested to see how they develop. Obviously, Brendan Page, he's not got any offensive proficiencies yet because he is a freshman. So pretty much a fresh start there. Same with Johnson, the other elite sort of shooting guard that they've got. So they can go either way. They can kind of build their offense, in my opinion, around those 2 guys. Kind of design a sort of scheme and a setup this year. Probably going to be a interesting season in terms of, I don't think they're going to be competing for the top of the Big Ten, but I could certainly see them maybe next year with the guys who have been redshirted, if they can develop coming off, if they've got the scheme set up that they want to run, maybe a good couple of recruits coming in. then this team could be turned around pretty quickly and be a very competitive team. I think they'll be a good team this year. I just don't think they're going to be up the top. I think they'll be fighting that middle pack in the Big Ten. So we move on to Indiana, run by Steve Fisher, and I'm excited to see this team in terms of, I think they're just stacked. I mean, this is probably one of the deepest teams in the Big Ten, in my opinion, in terms of they don't have true elite guys, but they have a lot of good guys at multiple positions. So they can really test people's bench out this year, and I'm going to be interested to see how that works. Clearly, Murray Cunningham, the senior, is going to be a big focal point for them. He's outside shooting. He is a bucket getter and a defender. So he's going to be key on both sides of the ball for this team. I fully expect them to probably play predominantly a motion offense. That seems like what most of these guys are pretty much set up to do. We've got an really good front court as well. I mean, in terms of the back court, you've got obviously Ben Walker and the likes of Cunningham probably handling that down. I'm not sure in terms of point guard again. I mean, that's one of the interesting things. I'm not sure in terms of point guard, but probably going to be Wade Brown taking the ball, but his defensive ability is going to leave them a little bit suspect on that one. So they're going to have to try and think of how they cover that defensive gap in the backcourt for them. But the front court, as I said, is very, very, very strong in terms of depth. You've got Ben Dodd, a good defender, good rebounder, got an outside shot as well, which is really helpful, to be honest with you. You've got Damon Rogers, who, whilst he's not a great defender, he's a good rebounder. So this team is not gonna allow you many second chances on the boards at all. You've got Travis McClock, I think that's how you say it. He's a pretty good defender, good rebounder. He's going to be good for them. And also they've got this walk-on as well, who I'm interested to see whether he gets some minutes, because he's not a great defender in Clarence Green. But, his drawing fouls ability is 91. And for me, I personally love front court players who draw fouls like this. It causes so many problems for the opposition. And I'm hoping he gets some minutes. And it might be one of the only walk-ons in terms of the Big Ten who really gets significant minutes. So we'll see how that works out for them. For me, this Indiana team, I think, is going to surprise people. They're obviously not ranked coming into the schedule of games, but I think they are going to be a deep team. They're going to really pressure benches, as I said. I'm just, a lot of it's going to hang whether Murray Cunningham actually pulls it out and actually, is the number one option and an efficient number one option for them. But I could see this team being up the top of the Big Ten, and I wouldn't be surprised, in my opinion. They've got some really interesting guys in here. They're deep. It's going to be a fun year for Indiana. So we move on to Iowa. Iowa, who are run by, I believe, let me double check this one. They're run by Alexander Dubs. And this team is probably the first ranked team we've talked about. In terms of this, though, I'm surprised they're ranked, actually. When I compare them to Indiana and I say they're a deep team, Iowa is really not a deep team. They have probably, in my opinion, the best player in the Big Ten in Kelsey Holmes. If this was, if we had him going to the NBA, and we will do, obviously, we'd have a simulation league off of this. This guy could look like a top 10 pick comfortably look like a top 10 pick. He can pass the ball, he scores, he rebounds, he defends, he blocks shots, he draws fouls like an absolute madman. I mean, he is generally probably one of the most exciting guys I'm going to try and keep track of in the Big Ten this year, outside of my Michigan team. This team is basically, in my opinion, ranked because of him and because of Jared Jacobson. That front court is probably the best front court in terms of the two guys that they've got. So I wouldn't be surprised if they run a lot of offense through the high post, utilising some of their passing ability to make that happen. Elsewhere, they do have holes, in my opinion. Outside of those two guys, they don't have a lot else in terms of front court. So they're going to be heavily relying on those guys for minutes. When we look at the back court, they have a mixture of guys who can do a job, but they don't really have anyone in particular, again, who I think is going to be a standout. So for me, this team is all about getting the ball into those two front court players, making sure they get points, get buckets. They'll be a good defensive team because of those two guys. For me, questions whether they're actually ranked because of the actual overall ability of the team or whether it's just because of Kelsey Holmes, though. So we'll see how that one plays out. In terms of how I think this team is going to look, I think they will be, up there, certainly, if Holmes stays healthy, if Jacobson stays healthy. If Holmes plays the way I can see his ratings, this team will be one of those that's going to be hard to play against because no one's going to have a player like Holmes, and will, I think they could. I don't think they'll challenge probably for the top of the Big Ten. I think they will be, a seeded team. I think they, if I'm projecting, I think they will make it to the postseason in CBGM, but mainly because of Holmes. I don't think because of the rest of the rotation. So then move on to Maryland, another ranked team here that's run by Shake Jr. I believe that's Shake Jr. Let me double check how it's said. Yeah, Shaka Jr. So this team, for me, I think they're deep. I think they've got some really interesting talents. They've got another 5-star talent in the Big Ten in Mark Linney, who is just a scoring guard basically. He can run offenses okay. His handling ability for me is a little bit low, but he's a good stealer. He's got the ball magician stats, the bucket getter, the defender. So he is a guy you want to run everything through. You will run everything, and basically he is a scoring point guard who is going to be an elite defender as well. So I'm excited to see how he works. In terms of the team, as I said, they're pretty deep. I mean, they've got some gaps in terms of depends how some of this front court develops. There's a bit of a trend in the Big Ten. A lot of teams have developing front courts, but you've got Sean Kenner, who looks like a pretty good rebounder, good shot blocker. He's gonna do the dirty business, is what you want him to do. For me, though, the team doesn't really have that second option, and it's going to be interesting to see how that develops through the season. For me, Georgie Porter could be that guy. He's not quite got the shooting ability though. He needs to develop to be that guy. And possibly we could see Reggie Washington come through. He's slightly better in scoring ability, but this team again, similar to Iowa we just spoke about, Mark Linney is going to be the driving force behind this team. They're slightly deeper in my opinion than Iowa, so for me I think they will probably be competing with the top 4 or 5 positions in this division. But it's going to be fun to see how this team plays out. I think again, because the fact that Linney is a junior, whether he stays or not, I don't know if he'll declare. But if he doesn't declare, if they can get another sort of second option in recruiting this year, this team could be a really good threat next season, in my opinion. Right, let's move on to Michigan State. We'll skip the Wolverines because I'm doing a Let's Play with that, and you'll hear all about that. So we've got the Michigan State by Cliff Underbuke. In terms of this team, they are obviously another ranked team. My general thing is that they have a really, really good set of freshmen coming in, and it's going to be about how quickly they grow into college basketball. So we've got the likes of Mike Cooper, who for me, he's a point guard. I would never play him at point guard. That handling ability scares the living daylights out of me. But to be honest, they probably will play him at point guard. Me, I wouldn't. I'm excited to see how he does. He looks like he is just going to be a really good defender, an insane shooter, and he's going to score at college level. There's no doubt about that. They've also managed to bring in Sharon Grays, who looks like a really, really good post guy. He's gonna grab balls for this team. As you can see here, he has the paint dominator and cleanup. So he is going to be a freak on the balls. He's going to be putting putbacks in. So when you've got a guy in the front court who's a great rebounder and a guy in the back court who is an insanely good outside shooter and's got good scoring ability, this offense is going to be pretty dynamic. And it's going to be fun to see, again, because they're both freshmen. They don't have any offensive proficiencies yet. So this team can kind of be moulded however Cliff wants to develop them, really. Outside of that, they've got quite a fairly good rotation of guys. You've got the walk-on Carrie McCarthy, who looks pretty good. Shawnal Humphrey, whilst not a defender, again, a good rebounder. You've got Jeremy Granger, who looks like a pretty good rebounder again. And you've got guys you can mould your offense around however you kind of see fit. So we'll see how that plays out. For me, Michigan are going to be up there. I think that dynamic duo of Grays and Cooper is going to depend whether they are competing for the division title, the conference title, or whether they are sort of in that bubble of sort of the 4 or 5 teams at the top. But it's going to be a fun season for Michigan. If those 2 guys stay on this roster and don't declare, this team, if they manage to get another 4 or 5 star recruit in, it's going to be deadly again next season as well. So we're moving on. We're halfway through. Moving on to Minnesota. Minnesota, who are, I believe, let's double check. It's Nico Medved who is looking after this team. Well, I mean, what is there to say about Minnesota? I mean, I really like the star quality they've got. They've got probably some of the better sort of players in the conference. James Martin is just a freak. He's going to score buckets in the front court. He's going to be exciting to watch. He can play a multiple of offensive proficiencies as well, so that's going to be fun to see how they utilize that. You've got Cedric Julius, who is again a really, really good rebounder, good scorer. He's again an inside guy. He's going to be, driving to the basket a lot, probably driving, forcing things there. He's not an outside shooter though, so this team does need some outside shooting. It does have that in the backcourt in terms of some of its guards that it has already. Whilst they're not elite in terms of anything, in terms of any real skill, they are pretty good outside shooters though. So that's going to work pretty well for them. My main concern for this team though is Andy Love. So I think Andy Love is going to be their starting point guard. That defensive ability scares the living daylights out of me. So again, they're going to have to think about what they do on defense to really sort of minimize that impact, because you don't want a poor defensive point guard going up against a really good defensive point guard, and in particular some of the guys I've pointed out as we've been halfway through this conference preview. So that's going to be key for them. I think this team's going to be in the middle of the pack. Yes, they have two really good elite players, but I just really question how some of this is going to fit together outside of this. They don't have too much depth in terms of front court outside of the likes of James Martin. So for me, that's going to be a big thing in terms of recruiting. They'll need to get someone in there. Obviously, Martin will be moving on after this season regardless of what happens. So that is a big gap in terms of front court going forward for them. So I think they're going to be middle of the pack. I think they're going to upset a few people in there though. I mean, I think they will beat some of the bigger teams, because if Julius and Martin turn up on the night, they're going to be very hard to play against. Next up on our list, we have Nebraska. Nebraska are run by John Lowe, who, I mean, this team, for me, is going to be a development year for them. They have gaps all over the place. There's question marks about the team in terms of overall quality when you compare them to other Big Ten teams. A lot of their performance this year is going to be determined by how they get this depth chart to work and function. They don't really have any standout guys, in my opinion. They've got guys who can't play defense as well all over the place. So it's going to be a development year. I mean, Nebraska's a tough challenge. I think they'll do down the bottom of the conference this year. Going to be all about recruitment. I mean, they have, 1, 2, 3 seniors coming off the books this year, and obviously the walk-on senior as well, coming off at least. So they're going to have 3 recruiting slots to use. They've got to utilise them. This is about building a program for Nebraska. That's how they're going to get this team out of the bottom of this conference. But it's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough for them. Going to need a bit of expert coaching. They're going to need a bit of good recruiting. But, that's what happens when you take some of the teams in the Big Ten. Some of them are going to be down the bottom. Some of them do have, less ability, less potential than other teams. And I think this is one of them. Next up, we have Rutgers. So Rutgers is run by Roy Hinson. I'm sure I'm butchering this team name, but unfortunately I don't know how you say it. in terms of the team itself, though, they have a lot of talent, in my opinion, particularly in the front court areas. The likes of Jabri Branson, whilst not a great defender, is going to be fun to see how he utilises some of this passing ability that he's got and outside shooting. He's quite a nice. He's going to be one of these guys who's not going to do much on defense. He'll grab rebounds and he'll be able to shoot from outside, which is a stretch 4 in college basketball is always really handy to have, because a lot of the front court players don't tend to be the stretch players still. Got Mike Ellis as well, who's a bit of a better defender, a bit more of an all-round type of guy. And then you've got the likes of Adrian Pratt, who's going to be an interesting one to watch as well. So they've got lots of ability in terms of grabbing rebounds, got a bit of a stretch 4 in there. Be interested to see how they develop that. You've got Ian Johnson as well, in terms of, again, a good rebounder, good shot blocker, not the best defender. It's going to be really interesting with this team, though, to see how they mould some of this together in terms of rotations and things. In terms of the backcourt itself, you've got Will Child, who is a good shooter, terrible defender. There's some defensive gaps all over the place for this team, to be perfectly honest with you. They're deep though. They haven't got any real gaps in terms of ability. It's more a case of they need to think about how some of this meshes together, because you can't have all 5 of your rotation terrible defenders on at the same time. They'll have to really rotate this around a little bit. For me, the success or failure of this team is going to be about how they utilise some of that front court. I think they're going to be down the bottom though. I think they've got too many guys who just don't play defense, in my opinion. And whilst they'll have a pretty good offense, I think they can run a couple of different schemes, I think, here that will work. I just think that defense is going to let them down. So they're going to be down the bottom. Again, they've got some interesting decisions to make. They've got, I think, only 1 slot in terms of possible recruitments. 2 slots, I think, actually, in terms of guys coming in. So they might rebuild the program around the 2 guys there. So we'll see how that one works. But I think they're going to be down the bottom this year. Right, we move on to my least favourite team in the Big Ten, Ohio, run by Rizzo. Yeah, okay, this team's going to be good. I can't not say anything else. They're ranked 10, and they're ranked 10 for a perfectly legitimate reason. They have a good freshman in Nick Moy, who's going to be insane. I mean, there's no denying that. They have a good shooting guard in terms of Jordan Keems, who's going to be good. They've got defense everywhere. They've got scoring in the front court. They've got scoring in the back court. My only real question for this team is I'm not sure who's going to handle the rock for them. They don't really have anyone in the backcourt who's a good ball handler, and that is a worry. A lot of teams do have that issue. So I'm sure Rizzo is heavily recruiting a point guard during this recruiting season. I would be surprised if he's not, because if you can put a point guard with those 2 guys going forward, it's not, obviously, assuming they don't declare, this team could be a title contender, in my opinion. They've got good guys. A lot of the seniors who are coming off, and they're not going to be massively missed. The likes of Chris Taylor, I mean, they're good players, don't get me wrong. And Mike Edwards, they're very good, players, and they'll be very good this season. But outside of that, losing those 2 guys, they get a good ball handling point guard in. They've got depth still to carry on and probably get better as the next season goes on. I think this year they're going to be, one of the top teams in the Big Ten. There's no denying that. Title ambitions, probably. I think they're going to be a tough matchup for teams, and we'll see how that one works out for them. But yeah, Ohio are going to be a good team, unfortunately. I have to say that. Right, Penn State. So Don Lookingbill. Is it Don Lookingbill or Dan Lookingbill? Let's double check. Don Lookingbill. Sorry about that, Don. Just had to check the name. Penn State, for me, are going to be an interesting team, because they're slightly set up differently to a lot of the other Big Ten teams when we start this CBGM season. They've got a really good backcourt, and their front court, whilst is not great, they'll have enough probably to hang in there with a lot of teams. I mean, personally, I'm excited to see how Galen Iacona plays. I love his ball handling. I love his passing. He's the ideal type of college point guard that you would want. I mean, he's a bit undersized. He's 6 foot, but he can shoot. He's not going to necessarily demand all of the ball, but he's going to do enough to make things happen. He's a steady pair of hands to give the ball to someone like Travis Yeagle, who's going to be phenomenal as well. I'm excited to see how he does. He's going to be a really good scorer for this team. They've got good players in at the wing positions, in the likes of Oakley and Overton. They're both good players. I mean, for me, I'd play Overton as a 6th man because of that defensive ability, and Oakley will start. And then you get down to the front court, and yes, okay, there's gaps in terms of when you look at the stars and things, and there are gaps. There's guys here who are pretty terrible, but they've got guys who are pretty much going to be able to at least compete a little bit. They're going to have defensive problems in the front court a little bit outside of Pebbles, but they've got guys in there who can at least rebound, and if they set up their scheme right, they can hopefully minimise some of that damage. If they're a bit more aggressive with their backcourt, they've got guys in here who can steal the ball pretty consistently. So I would look to utilise that. Penn State, for me, I think are going to be a middle team. Unfortunately, Yeagle is going to have to try and carry this team with Iacona in the backcourt and hope that works. But they could on a given night, if that backcourt is really firing against some of these teams who don't have good ball handlers, they could really cause an upset or two. I think they'll be in the middle though, middle to bottom, to be honest with you, this season. Getting near the end now, so we move on to Purdue, another ranked team in the conference. And so we've got Sam Blower, who's in charge of this team. Sam Blower. Sam, if you want to tell me your name after this, please feel free. I'm sorry if I butchered it. Purdue are interesting in the sense that they've got two interesting shooting guards, and neither of them can play point guard. So you've got Jeremy Wagner and you've got Paul Jennings, both really good shooting guards, and they're going to be good scorers. They can play defense. They can steal the ball. Going to be good at that. They can't handle the ball. So that means for me, Wagner is probably going to stay at shooting guard. Jennings is probably going to move down to small forward because they've got a bit of a gap there. They've got guys, freshmen they want to develop, who will probably come off the bench, who've got some good potential, so they want to develop them. So that's how I see that one playing out. But outside of that, you've got Samuels, who's probably going to handle the ball. Again, they don't have that point guard that you probably need to be an elite team, in my opinion. Then you move on to the front court. You've got Chris Smith, who looks like a pretty good college player, and then outside of that, you've probably got Lars Johnston. That's probably going to be, in my opinion, the front court. You've got the other guys, Seymour, Brown, and Tucker, who I think will just be off the bench. I don't necessarily see how they're ranked 21st in the nation, probably because their two shooting guards are really good. It's going to be about outscoring the other team and trying to work out a scheme how these two seniors, they're both used to playing high post. Whether that's the right system, to be honest with you, for this team to play, I'm not sure. Whether it's going to utilise them the most. If they figure out how to get those two shooting guards basically scoring insane amounts, and they cover some of the shortcomings at point guard and the bench in terms of the front court, they could be a top 25 team, I guess. But for me, it's all about coaching with Purdue. If they're going to be very well coached this year, then they could be there. They've obviously got the two seniors coming off, so next season this recruiting season is massive for Purdue. They've got to recruit and replace those two guys. If they don't, they could instantly go from probably a ranked team as they are here to probably being down the middle bottom of the Big Ten. That's how drastic those two are to this team. So we get ourselves on to the final team in the Big Ten, the Wisconsin Badgers, run by Greg Taz. So this team is the highest ranked team, I believe, in the Big Ten. And yeah, I mean, I can understand why. I think the first thing I'm going to say is, Greg, if you ever release Dean Oliver, I'm having him, because I read his books like a madman, and I'm a massive fan of his view on basketball. So if you do release him, drop me a line. I'm going to pick him up immediately. But right, back to the actual roster itself. So you've got Jasper Taylor, who is probably the second best front court man in the Big Ten. Again, if this was probably the NBA, I'd say he'd probably be a top 15 pick. Probably, maybe top 15, top 20, probably, if I had to guess. Passing ability is good. Ball handling is a bit of an issue. I'd want him to draw more fouls. In particular, his height is going to be an issue at the next level. But for college, he's a phenomenal player. They've got a really good supporting cast in the front court with him. You've got Dearborn, who's probably will come off the bench. Good rebounder, good shot blocker, disruptive type of player. You've also got Blaine Marsh, who probably will play in terms of the other front court position starting. Pretty much a good supporting player to the likes of Taylor, if I'm honest. A good experienced senior, can do a bit of everything. If we move to the backcourt, Marcus O'Brien's probably going to be okay. I don't necessarily see how he's a 4-star player, in my opinion, probably due to the passing, defensive stuff in terms of stealing and the outside shot. I worry about the ball handling. The good thing about him is that he can play multiple of offensive proficiencies at the moment, so they can pretty much pick and choose what they necessarily want to play there. In terms of the other bits, they've got an interesting set of backcourt players who can all shoot outside, but not particularly great at anything else. So, they're going to have space and options to let Taylor kind of do his thing. For me, this team, I don't necessarily see how they're ranked number 9. I think Ohio is a better team than Wisconsin. But, probably because I'm underrating the impact Taylor will probably have with that 100 rebounding ability and shot blocking. So he's going to be a disruptive thing. He's going to cause problems for the other team. That's my thing. So that gives us a quick roundup of the Big Ten. In my opinion, the top 4 teams I think will come out of this. I think Ohio will be the number 1. I then probably think it'll be Wisconsin. Then possibly the likes of Michigan, Ohio, Michigan, sorry, then Maryland, and then Purdue. That's how I kind of see it playing out. That's what I've got in my head as sort of the top 5 of this conference. But, obviously it all comes down to coaching. That's my quick snapshot of the Big Ten. Interested to hear your views. Drop us a comment if you've got a different view. If you're one of the coaches watching this, please feel free to tell me, what you feel your team's capable of this year, how you feel your recruiting's going to go, and everything. And we'll be back next time with maybe a different preview or maybe something else. But that is the Big Ten for the CBGM for this year. And good luck to everyone who is in the division and conference. And we'll see how it plays out.